So thank you so much for joining us today's session on how you can choose the best journals for you to publish your manuscripts in. There are a few approaches that I would like to talk about today. The first and foremost, I'll be talking to you about the quality of journals on Scopus. Secondly, I'll be talking to you to share with you on how you can identify which journals actually are in Scopus. So that'll be the first two components. The next part I'll be walking you through on how you can choose the best journals to publish your manuscripts in, and we'll conclude with a section on how you're actually able to leverage on metrics, specifically Scopus journal and Scopus article metrics to evaluate the journals that you should be publishing into. At any point in time, if any of you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box and Q&A box. And at the end of the session, you get a copy of both the presentation as well as the a recording via email sometime tomorrow. So let's talk first and foremost about the quality of journals on Scopus. Some of you may be familiar with Scopus, but for those of you who are not, just let me give you a quick run through on what Scopus entails. So Scopus gives you insights from trusted content so that you're able to progress, evaluate, and to reflect your research. You're able to generate over 90 million. We have approximately about 90 million records within the database, up to 95,000 affiliation profiles, over 17 million author profiles, and over 20 million open access items. We're the world's largest abstract and indexing database, where we curate abstract and citation database with powerful search, global content, article, journal level, many other bibliometric metrics, as well as APIs and structured data. The use cases are very broad, right? We provide you with journal, article, and author metrics. You are able to access your researcher profiles. You can see organizational profiles inside. You're able to access trusted, curated content. You can see structured search and in-product analytics, as well as to be able to access data exports, as well as APIs. We have many technologies enabling this in place, including the Content Selection and Advisory Board. You're able to access big data technology, machine learning, semantic technology, natural language processing, entity resolution, as well as advanced data science. So we really want to emphasize to you that all these metrics really come into place for you so that you're actually able to actualize your research. And crucially today, I'll be walking you through on journal, article, and author metrics so that you're more aware of how you're able to trust our curated content better. So how Scopus can help you, and because it's the first session, so I'm obligated to run you through on the various use cases. We support researchers across their careers, from students to advanced researchers, instructors, faculty, members, editors, team leads, so that you can trust, you're able to access trusted content, profiles, and you're able to access this easily as well. So with powerful search filters and refinement, you'll be able to understand research insights within researcher workflows better than before. Researcher profiles would power your networks and to advance your careers. We have organizational profiles for you to understand the expertise, and which will inform your level of analysis as well. We have curated multidisciplinary content across global content where you can inspire confidence. So Scopus functions at its core as an intuitive, powerful search, trusted content, and providing you with comprehensive content so that you're able to get insights to help you to progress your area of research. We have powerfully linked data, which are disambiguated and connected across to key research entities so that you're actually able to get insights. This will help you to inform evidence-based research. You'll be able to understand our organization better. You can generate reports, assessments, and analysis with ease and with confidence. And how we are able to do this is because we work very closely with a third-party organization known as the Content Selection and Advisory Board. They curate data with strict reassessment policies. We work together with research landscape, which informs their policies for organizational hierarchies. So a very good example for this would be the Ministry of Higher Education in Malaysia. We work together with MOHI, together with, so that you're actually able to generate MIRA 1 level insights. We have very strong disambiguation technology for author and for organizational names, and we are looking to target for completeness. So Scopus functions as an intuitive platform, which provides you with trusted content with robust search and analytics to help you to progress and to evaluate your research activity. So for today's session, what I really want to emphasize would be on helping research thrive, right? So you're able to actually progress your research confidently on a platform which grows its offering as research demands evolve. And we also want to help editors as well as users, right? So that they are able to understand journal strategy better. From an editor perspective, they can find reviewers and to develop special issues with journal benchmarking tools, right? And this is achieved via journal and article level metrics. From your perspective, right, what I think this is actually very functional and good for you is that you, on your hand, you're able to evaluate journals better with the metrics which we have provisioned as well. So this tool can be used both ways, and I will highly encourage you that you're able to leverage it so that you're able to ascertain which journals are the best journals for you to actually publish in. One key reason why Scopus is trusted is because we work together and we have been providing data sets for very key ranking organizations like the QS World University Rankings, as well as the Times Higher Education World University Rankings as well. We've worked together with other universities, including Shanghai Jiaotong in China, the NRRF. Within Asia Pacific, we work together with Beijing University, the NRF in Korea, Nanyang Technological University in Singapore, Keio University in Japan, as well as TCI in Thailand itself. From a more global perspective, we work together with the World Bank, with the National Science Foundation in America, with the University of Paris-Saclay in Paris, with the UK BIS and the OECD foundations. So this is the content selection and advisory board. Some of you will be wondering who they are. And they are a key reason why Scopus functions the way we have very effectively. They are an independent source of subject experts from all over the world. What happens is that when we look at titles which have been suggested to us to be indexed, we don't just simply index everything. We don't simply, reject everything. What we do is that we work together with these people, the CSAB, and they will advise us based on a series of journal criteria, which journals are worth being indexed and which are not. The CSAB are chosen for their expertise in specific subject areas, many of whom have journal editor experience as well. Sometimes, most of the times, people tend to ask me, hey, Nicholas, what is the criteria for a journal to be indexed within Scopus, right? And there's actually very transparent selection criteria. We make it open, we make it transparent so that everyone knows what exactly goes on within our indexing systems. So to qualify, all titles should meet the 5 minimum criteria first in order to be considered for Scopus review. The journal needs to be peer-reviewed. It needs to be published in English abstracts. It needs to have English abstracts. It needs to be published regularly. You need to have Roman script references, and you need to have publication ethics statements as well. The eligible title will then be reviewed by the CSAB based on this 14 selection criteria. So note, the first 5 criteria that I mentioned, this is what we call the minimum criteria, is only upon fulfillment of this 5 criteria before the journal is released to the CSAB based on the 5 key criteria of journal policy, content quality, journal standing, publication regularity, as well as online availability. Under journal policy, there's a very strong convincing editorial concept and policy. The journals would have to be peer-reviewed, very obviously. You need to have a diverse geographic distribution of editors as well as authors. For content quality, it needs to have academic contribution to the field itself. The abstracts have to be clear. It needs to be the quality has to be there, and it also has to conform with the stated aims and scope of the journal itself. Needless to say, the articles have to be very readable too. Under journal standing, the journal articles have to be cited often in Scopus. It needs to garner a certain number of citedness so that people would know that there is value to the research. The editor needs to have a strong reputation. There cannot be any delay in the publication schedule, and the content has to be available online. It needs to have an English language homepage, and of course, the homepage itself has to be of a certain standard. So note, these are the 14 criteria which Scopus evaluates it. Later, as I go on within the session itself, I'll go through some of the rationale as to what constitutes as to a good journal. Not all of them will be exactly the same, right? And there is a reason for it. This is just purely what the CSAP is looking out for with regards to eligible titles. So first and foremost, Scopus is committed to creating a representative, curated data set of scholarly content. Most journal selection is based on journal level data and performance. And one thing that we do very, very, very actively is that we monitor and we deselect titles which are predatory or which are below our regular standards. But the one thing that we cannot intervene nor step into will be with regards to the editorial autonomy of journals. So we cannot intervene on, say, editorial decisions on the quality of individual articles and conferences. This is something which we cannot do, right? Because there's only a limit where we can step into. So what we do is that we need to monitor the scientific content of the articles and abstracts which are included in the database. We monitor the plagiarism and we cannot step into plagiarism and other publication malpractice of individual articles. But what we can do is that we can speak to the publisher with regards to this, right? The same also applies for the authorship level of the paper. We cannot step into the editorial autonomy, but we can speak to the publisher pertaining to this as well. But one of the key things that we emphasize is that if publication malpractice is occurringly, knowingly, and on a structural basis, without a policy to address and to prevent such cases, Scopus will then flag, reevaluate, and to potentially discontinue titles which have continuously flouted these rules. One of the key things people tend to talk about will be predatory journals. The definition of predatory journals has been contentious for some time. And in 2019, a group of researchers met to define what predatory publishing is, and they reached a consensus definition in which predatory journals and publishers are basically entities who prioritize self-interest at the expense of scholarship, and which is also characterized by false or misleading information, deviation from best editorial and publication practices, a lack of transparency, the use of aggressive and indiscriminate solicitation practices. This is something I really want to emphasize on, because in this day and age, it's very easy to spread misinformation. It's very easy for people to just solicit people to publish with them under the pretense of getting them to be published. I would say, as a researcher, do be very careful with the types of journals that you're looking to publish into. You do not want to publish in a predatory journal because first and foremost, your work will not be recognized. It will not also be indexed. It's very hard for you to be re-indexed once you're published with a predatory journal. So do be very careful on the home that you have selected for your research, right? So also note one thing, predatory publishing publishers are basically entities who prioritize self-interest at the expense of scholarship. So watch out for that. So one thing, when it comes to Scopus, right, sometimes people will point to us, hey, why is that poor quality journals? So poor quality of journals in Scopus may have a lower than average performance, but they could still be relevant to be covered in Scopus because some of them may be niche journals where the research published in these journals could still be of high quality eventually, and these journals do not necessarily have to be removed from Scopus itself, right? Predatory journals, on the other hand, they are a threat to science and they should be avoided to be covered in Scopus. Journals that are included in Scopus benefit from wide global visibility and a resulting increase in terms of impact and quality. And sometimes this doesn't always happen. Sometimes the journals may change ownership and they may also become predatory. Some journals may also be hijacked, right? When there's someone who pretends to be these journals. And this is a thing which I've seen quite often, actually. When you're making decisions about your research, it's very important that the decisions are based on data which you can trust. So predatory journals, they are a threat to the integrity of Scopus and science in general, and which is why we take a very strong stance with regards to it. And we are very, very judicious about the journals which we index within Scopus, and we are very quick to also at the same time discontinue predatory journals itself. But the one thing that we do note is that because predatory journal publishing is very ill-defined and is subject to personal interpretation, the independent review of individual journals by academic subject experts in each field is very, very, very essential. I thought it would be interesting to run you through on how a journal is normally indexed. And I think this is a workflow, right? So we can see that it's broken down into five key areas, right? Under title suggestion, title validation, title enrichment, review and decision, as well as communication. So the publisher, the editor, or the editor board member, right? They will submit a title suggestion form with regards to the journal. And we will first check at desk for the Scopus minimum criteria check. If the minimum criteria is not met, we will submit a feedback form back to the submitter where it's rejected. But if the criteria, the minimum criteria is met, we will then enrich it. We will suggest on what type, how you can improve the title. There may be a local board which would help to enrich it further. But then again, at this point in time, we would then release to the CSAB for the review. The subject chair would then review it, and then we'll provision you with the feedback, whether or not it's to be accepted or otherwise. I would say, please be very careful, right, when you're submitting your journal for acceptance, because it's not a guarantee that your journal will be accepted all the time. And when it's rejected, right, there may be an embargo period of approximately, say, about 3 to 5 years. So do be very careful. Make sure your journal is ready before you send it for submitting. On our part, the reason why we are so stringent and why we have such strenuous processes in place is because we want the journal to be ready before it's submitted to us, because we can't simply have the content selection and advisory board to review journals all the time. And this is why, right? We have approximately about 3,500 title suggestions every year on average, of which only 40% meets the minimum criteria, and of which 46 are accepted after the CSAB's reviews, right? So out of 3,500 titles, we accept maybe about 600 titles. We can't simply have everyone to review all these journals all the time, which is why we're so stringent about it. We want to make sure that you're ready before you actually publish it. We also have a very strong, rigorous re-evaluation process. It doesn't mean that once you're indexed in Scopus, that is it, you're set for life. It doesn't work that way. Approximately about 128 titles, right, would continue to meet the criteria and continue, but 135 titles would not meet the selection criteria, and the coverage will be discontinued moving forward. So some of the reasons which we discontinue titles is due to feedback from users and stakeholders on poor performing journals. When we have identified poor performing journals using metrics and benchmarks, and when a radar has predicted journals with outline performance, it will be re-evaluated by the CSAB as well, and then whether or not it's to proceed with the content curation or otherwise. So what happens is that we evaluate this for 2 years in a row. If a journal underperforms for 2 consecutive years, we will then re-evaluate the title based on the Scopus selection criteria, where we decide whether or not we continue with the forward flow or we discontinue the forward flow. So it's a very strong, very tedious, very arduous task of monitoring, flagging, as well as curation as well. So these are some of the metrics and benchmarks which we have set in place, right? In terms of the self-citation rate, a total citation rate, the site score metrics, the number of articles in the journals, the number of clicks on Scopus, the abstracts usage on Scopus. These are some internal metrics which we benchmark accordingly, but I would say these are also important metrics that you should factor in as well when you're looking to choose a journal, right? Do you want to publish in a journal where the self-citation rate is high? That's one thing that you may want to evaluate on as well. When you want to evaluate the citation rate of a journal, when you want to see the site score of the journal itself, the number of documents published within the journal, etc. These are some things and factors that you can leverage on when you're using it to evaluate a journal to publish into and to submit to. So the radar tool, which you saw earlier, is an LCPA-made data analytics algorithm, which is trained to also identify outlier journal behavior within the Scopus database. This would include rapid and unexplainable changes to the number of articles published, or unexplainable changes in geographical diversity in terms of authors or affiliations. So this improves continuously by new examples of rules added to it, and it will run once a year where you can check the full journal database of about 24,000 titles. The journals flagged by the radar would then be added to the re-evaluation process. They will be evaluated by the CSAB in the year of the identification by the radar tool. And upon completion of the re-evaluation, it will decide whether or not to continue a journal's coverage or to discontinue the forward flow of in terms of Scopus itself. A journal can also be flagged for re-evaluation based on publication concerns on either publisher or a journal level. The concerns for such journals are identified by Scopus. They could be flagged to Scopus by the research community and to be taken seriously. If the concern is legitimate, the title will then be added to the re-evaluation program to be re-evaluated by the Content Selection and Advisory Board in the year of the identification of the publication concern. So that's the first part that we have to talk to you about with regards to Scopus, about the content that's indexed in Scopus, and the care that we take to make sure titles on it are of certain quality and they are also not predatory. At any point in time, right, if any of you have any queries, do feel free to type them in the Q&A chat box, or you can type them in the webinar chat. I've enabled you to message this as accordingly as well, right? Hopefully, I want to make this as interactive as possible. There's almost like 200 of you on this session. Do feel free to put in the questions and the queries you have so that, I can learn what are the questions that you're facing and how you're able to leverage on Scopus or ScienceDirect, right, to help you with your work. Yeah. So the next part that we want to talk about would be how you can identify which journals are on Scopus. I would say first, I want you first and foremost, right, to go to scopus.com. You can click on the top right corner under sources, and it will bring you to this page itself. First and foremost, you find a download Scopus source list here. I would highly encourage you to click on this, right, so that you can download the Scopus source list, or at the same time, if you really want, you can request an overview in terms of the site score, SNP, and the SJL journal metrics. So the Scopus source list is updated on a monthly basis. It was not the case previously. We understand that there was a need for it, which is why we suggested to the product team to update this on a monthly basis as well. So please do feel free to leverage on this. So sometimes some of you would also be wondering, okay, so what happens for journals which are discontinued? And this is a real problem, right? In Malaysia, I understand that there's the need to publish in Scopus index journals. Sometimes you publish in it because that's a requirement. And then you realize that my article is not being indexed within Scopus. So there are a couple of reasons here, right? So one, sometimes the links are slow and we don't publish it straight away. This happens. But sometimes you may face the unfortunate situation when you publish into a journal and the journal is subsequently discontinued. And this can happen, right? So a couple of things here. First and foremost, when the journal is discontinued, the publisher is definitely informed of the decision, right? No new content is added to Scopus during this period of time, except for journals that are flagged because of publication concerns and they're already put on hold during the review process. The content which is already indexed, unfortunately, remains as a matter of scientific record because we don't know when the journal stopped being good, if you get what I'm trying to say, right? And we need to ensure stability, and the consistency in terms of research trend analytics. However, in terms of exceptional cases of proven severe unethical publication practice, content already indexed in Scopus may then be removed, and the site score will not be given for discontinued titles. So for those of you who don't want, another route of you for accessing this source would be to go to lcpa.com into Scopus to search for how Scopus works and the content. You can select and download the source list, which also includes the Scopus discontinued sources list as well. This is one way for you to check on which journal titles are discontinued. Someone has in the audience is asking, once the journals are found in Scopus, is it safe to say it's not a predatory journal? I would say yes, it's pretty safe because we take a lot of steps and actions in place to make sure that the journal itself is not predatory itself. Sometimes some of you, right, like I think one very good example would be MDPI. There's this website called, I think, Predatory Reports, who say that MDPI is predatory. And the question, and some of you will also be concerned to find that there's MDPI within Scopus. Scopus has done multiple checks on MDPI, and we found them to be not be predatory. On the other hand, we don't know what's or who is actually behind predatory reports, or how accurate they are, or how authentic they are as well, right? So we'll be very careful, and we are very, very thorough, I would say, when it comes to investigating journals that are indexed within Scopus, because as you can probably tell, with a strong reputation to uphold, get a gold standard, and we definitely do not want to, lose faith with our community easily as well. So that's something which we take very, very strong and very, very stringent care in. Someone has asked also a very good question. Why is it for some journals, Scopus coverage years are from 2017 to 2022, and some are from 96 to present? Does it mean that the journal has been discontinued after 2022? Very good question. I would say the first thing, a key reason for this most of the time would be because when we look at the latest document, because it's still fairly early in the year, it's not H1 yet in 2023. What happens is that some of these journals, it depends on the publication regularity of the journal, right? So I would always encourage you to take a look at the aims and scope of the journal. I will also urge you to take a look at the historical record of the journal. You can see whether or not how many articles a journal is indexed within Scopus, maybe 22. I've seen that often as well, which means that they publish maybe 2 issues, right? So you also want to check the publication regularity. Sometimes after ascertaining the publication regularity, you can cross-check to see whether or not there's a journal that's been published, an issue has been published in 2023 itself, right? So that's a reason. Sometimes the start date will be different, right? Start date happens when a journal is indexed within Scopus, right? Sometimes you can also see, I've seen the oldest I've seen is like 1892, right, to present, because it just shows that the journal has been around for a really, really long time. So the start date doesn't matter. The end date, I would say, take a look at the documents, the latest published documents within Scopus itself, and this will be much more indicative as well, right? And I would also say sometimes it's just matters of like whether or not the source page itself is updated. So Kanan, maybe you can give me a couple of examples later, and we can run through it in the live session that, I'll do at the end of the session itself. Yeah, but good question, very good points. So the next one that, okay, you need to give me examples, Asama. Someone said that there are some journals that publish monthly and is indexed in Scopus. I would say actually it's not, you shouldn't doubt it, because there are some journals like the Lancet, like Cell, that publish very regularly. So what happens, to give you some ideas behind the mechanism, is that we work together with all the publishers, right? So we have probably about, 5,000 publishers that we work with. and we automate the APIs, right? So once it's updated on their end, it's also automatically pushed over from our side as well. I'm not saying this is a foolproof process, right? Because it boils down to individual publishers, and this is not something we are in control of. But the publishers but we try to automate it, right? So whenever an issue is published, it will be indexed within Scopus. It will automatically be updated through the data links into Scopus, right, as soon as possible. The onus, though, boils down to the publishers updating these data links, right? So that's just something for you to know as well. Yeah. But otherwise, no, it's possible. I would say don't be so skeptical about it. It really depends on who the publisher is, how judicious they are with regards to it as well. Yeah. The next part, I think, well, I spent the first half exactly talking about Scopus, the mechanics behind it, and how you know you can trust it as well, so that you're able to evaluate and ascertain whether or not a journal is worth publishing into. The other process that I want to walk you through would be from more as an author perspective, right, on how you can choose the best journals to publish your manuscript in, the title of today's workshop itself. So I would say there are many different steps that you can take to achieve and to do this. First and foremost, you can ask your colleagues and your peers for the recommendations on which is a good journal to publish in, step one, right? Then the next thing you can also do is you can get insights from a supervisor, from a mentor, and from the authors that you have read. And then next, you can also book a consultation with a librarian itself, right? So you're able to start the search and to consult and to also extend your network accordingly. You can look at where the articles that you have cited and where they are published. And this is a very good example, right? For instance, if you find that there are some articles which you think are of value because you're citing them, you may also want to look at the home in which they're hosted in as well. That was something which I used to do as when I was writing my thesis. You're not so sure about topic, but you found an article that was very poignant, then you backtrack, right? And then you go backwards. Then you're like, oh, okay, this journal actually has a lot of good content for me. Maybe this is a place that I can start taking a look at, right? So I would encourage you to take an approach that way as well. You can also note the journals which are referenced in the bibliography of key subject papers within your field as well. So if there's some titles, right, that you tend to go back to index and to reference it, these are titles that might actually be worth it for you in the long run, right? So maybe you can like refer to it as well. You can also search for authors within your subject field and to discover exactly where it is that they're publishing into. I will also say that when you're finding a journal, you need to always begin with the end in mind. You need to always ask yourself, what is the intent behind publishing, right? Because I know all of us, when we're publishing, we just want to be, fulfill our criteria. But you put in a lot of effort and work into your research, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, right? So you really want to find the best home where your research can be read, it can be seen, it can be cited, and where your work, right, gets, you are getting the due results of your work, right? So you need to ask yourself a few questions. I'll break it down to 5 key points first. Format-wise, right? What is your manuscript format? Is it an original research article or is it a review paper? The next step is, is there a need for you to publish in a Go Open Access article? Another one would be for you to ask yourself if you're looking to publish in a title with a multidisciplinary or an interdisciplinary focus. Is there a specific publisher that you want to publish with as well? And also, are you publishing research data or any other outputs alongside the article? USM is very strong with regards to research data management, right? So this one, I'm sure you can also speak to your librarians for additional guide and support. Then I want to break it down into 7 broad aspects. So there will be a checklist I'll give you at the end of the session, right? But the 7 steps that you need to ask yourself. First step, is the manuscript the right fit for the journal? My encouragement is for you to always go to the homepage of the journal, look at the journal's aims and scopes and identify them, read them, right? So you can also take a look, you'll be able to understand what the journal wants to achieve, what is looking to set out to what's the area of scope, how clearly he has defined it, and then also look at the recent articles which have been published, and then you can take a look and compare, hey, is the journal publishing what they said they wanted to set out to do? Are they consistent, right? Do they have a fixed approach in mind? One very big step. I would say don't submit without checking the aims and scope. A key reason why editors immediately reject manuscripts is because the paper itself is a poor fit for the journal itself, right? So don't just simply fire your manuscripts to journals without having clearly understood what the aims and scope of the journal is. You can investigate the journal to discover the subject areas which are covered, the type of articles which are considered, the disciplines which are covered, whether or not supplemental files are welcome, or whether or not it has a regional or a global reach. So in recent years, there's more different types of articles, and they're often alongside journals specifically developed to publish them. Journals are now available which publish descriptions of your data, the methods, the hardware, or the software to enhance reproducibility. So you can now select titles which publish the components of your study as separate standalone articles or to create video articles. You can share 3D visualizations of your scientific models or publish the data which underpins your study itself. And you can choose journals which publish sound rather than novel science, or titles which accept submissions from all disciplines, or to focus on those with a multidisciplinary or an interdisciplinary approach. Next, second step, right? You need to ask yourself if you have any funder or institutional mandates that you need to consider and to factor into. So first and foremost, you need to make sure that the journal aligns with the funder or the institutional requirements with regards to publication. The journal information page will explain options around open access, data publication, and the use of persistent digital object identifiers or DOIs. The publisher websites will often provide information on how to comply with specific funding body mandates as well. I would say, please don't forget to investigate institutional or funder requirements with regards to publication, and the failure to comply to do so could jeopardize future funding or collaboration opportunities. So make sure you do your homework first, right? Within Malaysia, I think Scopus as well as Web of Science, these are the two major databases that you work with. So my encouragement is for you to analyze and to do a deep-rooted study into the journals for both, which is indexed in both databases. I think that's probably the safest method to approach it. So is the journal also, the third question, right? And this one happens when I spoke to an editor of our journal as well. I asked him, at the end of the day, what would you consider as important journals? And his answer is simple: whether or not the journal is being read in the research community that he is active in, as well as the communities that he wants to reach out to. So a couple of things here. Check the journal's aims and scope for information on readership. In the case of Elsevier, you can select journals. Some journals, right, have a map showing where and how often the journal content has been downloaded. The maps are accessible via the Journal Insights link on the journal information page. You can check whether colleagues and mentors would read and will recommend the journal as well. Find out if the journal's papers are indexed in databases which are relevant to your subject area. For instance, PubMed in the area of life science and biomedical research. And I would say don't publish in journals that are not able to reach the audience who can benefit from your work, because in this case, you're not getting citations that your work deserves. You need to ask if there is a reasonable chance of acceptance. So look for the acceptance and the rejection rate before factoring it into the decision-making process. Not all journals would offer this information. Within Elsevier itself, we have an Elsevier Journal Finder that will give you all this data itself. And I will encourage you to use the Elsevier Journal Finder. I'll work you through it in just a bit towards the end of the session. Another thing, right? Don't submit to a journal which is very unlikely to accept your paper. Don't just simply just shoot all the way for the stars, although I would encourage you to most of the time. But sometimes what happens if your paper doesn't fulfill the criteria, you will then lose time spent submitting and to wait for the editor and the reviewer comments. But on the bright side, if you receive constructive comments upon the rejection, make sure you incorporate them before you can submit them to a new journal. I will also say that this is also a tension, right? Like it boils down to at what point should I submit? At what point should I not submit, right? And I would say this is a balance that you definitely need to strike. It's not easy, it's not straightforward, but I would encourage you to do so. So sometimes, right, it can be very tempting to submit to the journal with the highest impact metrics, or the most recognized name within the subject field itself. Often this would have the highest rejection rates, but it doesn't mean that your manuscript, like I mentioned earlier, it won't be accepted. It's just that you need to be very sure that it's worth submitting if it meets all the journal's criteria. So to be very careful about that as well. The fifth step, make sure that your journal is indexed by the relevant database. So search for the journal in a scholarly database that has a very rigorous selection process, such as Scopus, such as Web of Science. Don't just simply rely on the journal's claim to be listed in databases. I would encourage you to do your homework. Make sure that the journal is actually indexed in the database, because predatory journals themselves, they would sometimes make false claims itself, right? And you don't know how accurate that is. Be very careful with regard to that. Make sure the journal is listed in the database with a strong journal review process. We mentioned earlier how journals listed in Scopus is being reviewed by the Content Selection and Advisory Board with regards to peer review, English abstracts, publication, regular publications, Roman script references, and a publishing ethics statement. Is then assessed based on 14 quantitative and qualitative criteria itself. So also one thing to note is that if it's a new journal, there may be a time lapse before it's actually included in databases. So if your need So a new journal may be worth publishing into, right? But it may not be indexed in the database just yet. It may be eventually as well, right? Just for your information. So if there's a new journal which you think that your work is suited to, right? Then you can just keep a bookmark of that journal, wait for it to be indexed in a couple of years, and then you can continue submitting to it as well. That's something you can factor in. Because the good thing about research that we all know is that it's really a long-term thing, right? So the good news is that if you're the first comer to that particular area of research, you can definitely pay attention to this and you can reap the rewards later down the road. I'll be talking about metrics, right, in the last quarter of an hour. But one thing which we talk about metrics is that it's important for you to search within an A&I database so that you can find and compare journals based on several citation metrics. Don't rely upon one number or type of metric when you're deciding on where you can publish in, right? Because knowing how the journal content has previously performed will help you to understand its reach and its impact. So do leverage on that. We have been talking about other metrics as well, right? The San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessments have recommended a reduced focus on the impact factor and with alternate approach, including the NIH relative citation ratio and the CITE score that's been launched by LCPA in 2016. We also introduced our factors were proposed to highlight the successful reproducibility in terms of the study and the attention metrics which are offered by Plum Analytics, Newsflow, and Altmetrics, which are gaining in popularity as well. The hunt is for a metric that measures not just only attention, but the sentiment behind the attention as well. And the ability to measure societal impact is another goal. And some believe new metrics to measure openness, data quality, and collaboration is also required. Part 7 for this, you need to ask yourself, first and foremost, is the journal reputable, right? We know that there's no universally agreed definition in terms of a predatory journal or publisher. So you need to be very careful with regards to this. I would say publishing in a predatory journal can have negative consequences because your article would then be perceived as not meeting a quality standard because it lacks peer review. The article processing charges, or APCs, which is provided by your funder or your institution, would then be lost, which will impact your future grant or career progression opportunities. And the reach of your work would be limited if the database is not indexed in leading databases, and the work itself may be lost if it's not archived correctly itself. So I would say don't ignore the warning signs of a predatory journal, especially if you can pick up on it. And it will include one of the following, right? When it actively and aggressively solicits submissions and often for a fee. When the call for paper emails contain spelling and grammatical mistakes. If it has a short publication history of 4 issues or less, even though the journal has existed for several years. If the scope itself is very broad or the content published does not match its aim and scope, and if it offers rapid publication, especially within 48 hours. If it's too good to be true, then you probably know that it's not true. So I would say, make sure, and definitely, I think all of you here will be able to pick up on the warning signs. Don't ignore it. You can also use the following checklists to ascertain whether or not a journal is reputable. And you can also check with a librarian if you have any questions. Is it listed in the relevant journal finder tools and the database? Is it enrolled in the Committee on Publication Ethics? Can you tell who the publisher of the journal is? Is the journal published by a well-known reputable society, academic press, or a publishing house? Is it clear who the editors and the editorial board members are? Does it perform some kind of peer review? Are the article processing charges and the timing of the fees clear? Does the publisher provide details about open access licenses and their associated conditions? You need to leverage on this checklist, right, to determine whether or not a journal is reputable. And yeah, I will encourage you to do so. So the Committee on Publication Ethics is where most reputable publishers enroll their journals in. It's usually visible on the publisher website. The membership provides editors and authors with the reassurance that comprehensive publishing and research ethical guidelines will be followed. They have a new rule that journals can't be approved for membership until they are at least a year old. So a brand new journal may be reputable, but they may not just be eligible for membership just yet. You may also want to dig into the journal management, details about the journal management, check the address and the contact details for the publisher to make sure they are plausible without any mobile phone numbers. Be very careful if the editor and the publisher is the same person, because it can be a warning sign, although it doesn't always mean the journal is suspect, but it's a warning sign. And if you're not familiar with the editor or the other members of the editorial board, check to make sure that they exist. You can check their bios on the institution or the personal websites to see if they mention their editorial role for that journal itself. And of course, peer review itself, right, is regarded as a cornerstone for scholarly publishing. It's an important stamp of approval for a published manuscript. And if a journal submission to a publication time is measured in hours or days, or if they make you pay for the APC upfront, right, these are big warning signs because it shows that the journal is unlikely to offer robust peer review. Normally, the APC is only levied upon once a manuscript is accepted for publication, right? I would place a huge emphasis on the timestamp for this. We don't take the APC. Good publishers, or for instance, Elsevier, we don't accept the APC upfront. We only make sure that we only collect the APC after your article has been accepted. And there's a reason for this, is because we don't just simply see it as a collection money approach. We want to make sure that when it comes to Go Open Access publishing, we want to make sure that your work is of sufficient quality before it's accepted within our journals, and it's only then that the APC is collected. And this model, right, is entirely because you're looking to publish in a Go Open Access journal, where readers don't have to pay to read your article, right? Because you're paying for them to read your article. If you don't want to pay for your readers to read, it's very fine. We can simply just publish it in a normal subscription journal itself, right? Emphasis here is a reputable journal is open about its peer review process. It will describe whether or not it's a single or double blind, whether it's pre or post publication, for instance. You can find out what an article publishing charges are by checking the pricing information on the publisher's page when they publish open access. If there's a request to pay upfront, be very cautious, because reputable open access journals may only invoice if an article is accepted for publication. It would then be easy to find details about the open access license options and their associated conditions. They're featured on the journal's information page or in the author guidelines, and many publishers will often offer one or more of these licenses, which are developed by Creative Commons, right? And they're recognized by the prefix CC BY, NCND, etc. Okay, there's some questions which are coming up. So I would say that I'm running a bit short on time. So for those of you who have to leave by 11, yeah, please do feel free to do so. I will answer the questions shortly after that. But for those of you who can stay on, do stay on, because I'll be very happy to take on the questions that you have, and I'll be very happy to do a demonstration as well, based on the queries that you've submitted. Yeah. But for the last part of this section, I'll be talking about journal and article metrics. So there are three key metrics in Scopus that I want to talk about. Firstly, site score. Secondly, SNP, and thirdly, SJL. Site score was developed by Elsevier. It uses a 4-year citation window, and it's a metric that gives a comprehensive, transparent, and current view of a journal's impact. It's a very simple way to calculate site score. It's really the total number of citations divided by the total number of documents across 4 years. I'll give you a quick demo on this data. For SNP, this is source normalized impact per paper. It measures contextual citation impact by weighting citations based on the total number of citations within a subject field. So what it does is that it normalizes a journal within the subject field itself, right? And the impact of a single citation is given higher value in subject areas where citations are less likely, and vice versa. The average score for this is 1.0 on a global level, and I think higher than 1 would be good. Another metric that we also built into Scopus would be SJL, which was created by Scimago Journal Ranking, Scimago Labs. So this one is what we call a prestige metric, which is applied to journals, book series, and conference proceedings. So in this case, the subject field, the quality of the subject field, and the reputation of a journal have a direct effect on the value of a citation, and uses a scoring scale with an average of 1 for comparison. There's some metrics in place that we want to talk about, right? And I would say that for you, you can leverage on documents and H-index at the researcher level. At an article level, you can use citation count, citations per paper, FWCI, top quartile outputs, usage captures, mentioned social media. At the journal level, we can talk about site score, Scimago Journal Rank, and source normalized impact per paper. Journal impact factor is not an Elsevier metric. I would say that you would probably have to leverage this on Web of Science. There are many different ways for you to use metrics, where you can use it to prioritize where you read, where you may want to publish in, how you may want to build your researcher profile, how you can want to enrich your promotion and tenureship portfolio, how as a librarian you may want to develop collections, and how you can benchmark a collection of research outputs. I mentioned earlier about CiteScore 2021, right? We can see that it's very simply calculated. We take a look at the citations received from 2018 to 21 to articles, reviews, conference papers, book chapters, and data papers which are published in these 4 years, divided by the number of publications published in these 4 years as well. A very good example would be for materials today. So we can see over here, right? The coverage is from 2002 to present, published by Elsevier, and there's an ISSN here. I encourage all of you to always take a look for a journal's authenticity by taking a look at the ISSN, because that is one thing that cannot be fabricated. We can see materials today is indexed in the subject area for engineering, under mechanical engineering, mechanics of materials, physics and astronomy under condensed matter physics, and general material science, right? Some of the areas. And over here, you can see like how well the journal has been performing with regards to the site score, with regards to the SJL, and with regards to the SNP itself. At the same time, you can see over here, this is the static site score, right? The site score that's locked in place from 2021. So you notice that both, right, very incidentally have a site score of 33.0, well, 33, right? And then the 2022 is the updated one. So the fixed site score at the bottom left corner is was calculated based on 5th of May of 2022, right? So 2022's site score, right, will be done actually on probably sometime will be released sometime next month, right? Once site score 2022 is locked in, and then you can see that an active live site score tracker for 2023 will be into place. You can also see how it's being calculated, the number of citations from the 485 documents that this journal has published, right? Whereas for this year, Materials Today has published about 555 documents to date, and it has garnered more citations as well. The next thing I will encourage you to do will be to take a look at the journals itself and then compare these journals with the other journals within its top subject field. So Materials Today, right, is ranked 4th out of 601 other journals within mechanical engineering, right? First will be Nature Materials, Advanced Materials, Material Science and Engineering, followed by Materials Today, which they're all in the 99th percentile. So if you want to look for a journal to publish in, you can simply look for the top quartile, right? The top 4. So 601 divided by 4, 150, right? That's one way for you to identify the top journals that you may want to publish into. So another way for you to accrue visibility, right, would be to take a look at article level metrics. We have PlumX metrics built into Scopus. You can take a look at the usage, captures, mentions, social media, and the citations. So these are comprehensive item level metrics, which provides insights into the way people interact with individual pieces of research output. We visualize scholarly engagement. It includes 5 categories of metrics and is used to design engagement without a score. So a very good example that I want to show you here will be here, because sometimes, right, you want to gather and show evidence better. Don't just simply talk about, this is my publication in this journal title. I have 17 citations, 9 Twitter mentions, 125 Mendeley bookmarks, and 2 blog mentions. Doesn't matter, right? Because there's no context for it. So what you want to do is that my 17 citations has placed my work in the top 5% in economics research in Scopus. The impact of it is that it's been mentioned, bookmarked, or viewed in over 40 countries according to this source. The paper has been covered by 10 media outlets worldwide, including the BBC and the Wall Street Journal. Is recommended in X and Y economics research blogs and was described in tweets by prominent researcher Professor Jones as a significant step forward in our understanding. So this is one way, right, that you can communicate out metrics better, and it can showcase your work better as well. Yeah. So I have more information to showcase to you, but I want to talk very quickly about the Elsevier Journal Finder. This is a free resource which allows researchers to find journals that can be best suited for publishing your scientific article. So it looks specifically within the Elsevier Journal database. It's powered by the Elsevier fingerprint engine. You can go to journalfinder.elsevier.com. It uses smart search technology and field of research specific vocabularies to match your article to our Elsevier journals. So you just put in your paper title, your abstract, and the keywords, right? Very straightforward. You key them in, and then you will search for it. You can refine your search based on journals that offer Go Open Access or journals with subscription. You can see the time to publication. You can see the site score, impact factor, the acceptance rate, the time to the first decision, and the time to publication. You can sort it based on the matches, right? And you can see the test match score accordingly. You can see how much it costs to publish within the journal itself, right? This is some of the examples that you can definitely leverage on within the Journal Finder. And I encourage you to take a look at it. Another one which I really like is Researcher Academy, which takes you through the different phases of the researcher cycle, from the beginnings of research preparation to demonstration of impact. It helps you for your careers, either inside or outside of academia. It shows you how you can get funding for your research, shows how you can get your papers to be accepted into top journals, and this is completely free, right? You can take a look over here. You can see in terms of research preparation for funding, research data management, research collaborations, that's one aspect. Shows you how you can write for research on how the fundamentals for manuscript preparation, technical writing skills, if you want to write a book. You can also see publication process in terms of the fundamentals of publishing, how you can find the right journal, the ethics, open science, how you can navigate peer review, and how you can communicate your research. So there's lots of tools that you can leverage on for Scopus. So myself and my colleague Sander himself, we are the customer consultants that will support USM. You can probably find this here, right, in terms of the Malaysia Scopus webinars. Feel free to join us for these sessions itself, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you then as well. Yeah. But in the meantime, thank you so much. Over here, if I can trouble you to complete very kindly the survey, let us know how you feel about it. This will also impact what you feel about how well we have done or not for this particular workshop. You can also collect your certificates with the links here, and you can redeem it with the specific code. So yeah, I think there's been a lot of questions which have been popping up within the Q&A and the chat box. Let me address them one at a time itself. So I'll check the first one. How can we check the impact factor of a journal? I believe USM has access to this platform called Web of Science. You can check the impact factor there as well. So is credibility of any journal drastically reduced? If it happens, then what will be the importance of a published research journal at a bad time of the journal? I would say it really depends. So you really need to do the homework, right, to see whether or not what is the history of a journal. And a very good way for you to would be to look at Scopus, look on Scopus for the journal itself. You'll be able to see just how well the articles are performing. Usually when you read an article, you're fairly clear whether or not the article which you're reading is a good article or otherwise, right? You need to be very objective then, and then decide whether or not the quality of the journal is of a certain standard or otherwise. At the same time, you may also want to check who are the editorial board members of that journal. Usually that would impact it. I would say just be very careful, do a lot of homework when you're looking at the journal itself. It will give you a lot of clues whether or not the journal is authentic, whether or not the quality is there or otherwise. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay, I have 20 questions. 1 second. Sorry, something went wrong. What's that with regards to? Apologies. The link is not working. Okay, cool. Give me a quick second and I'll check it for you. Yeah. Sometimes this happens, so my apologies for that. It's just really the platform itself. Would that be under the certificates? I guess it is. Yeah. I think you can get the certificates. I clicked on it and it's working. Yeah, it's I'm sorry, it's actually working for me. Both links are actually working for me. Yeah. Let me copy it for you as well. Maybe it'd be easier for you too. Yeah. Actually, I should just copy it last. It's probably easier. Sorry. Apologies for that. Here you go. This might make your life a lot easier. Yeah. Okay, sorry. I need to go back to the questions that some of you very kindly asked me as well. So some journals can be found in both Scopus as well as Web of Science. So which one to declare the most? I'm sorry, what do you mean? Asma, I need your help to tell me what do you mean by which one to declare the most? I would say you can use both, and then I would say you need to filter it by the subject area or the sub-subject area accordingly to understand how the journal has been performing as well. I think probably ideally what you want to do is that you probably want to make sure that both journals are in the same portals, right? I think that would be a safer way to do so. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes I understand, Samia. You need to know where to find which journals that you can publish quick, and because you're students and your time is limited. But I would say, really, honestly speaking, sometimes we all know that more haste, less speed, you know. I understand that you have a need to be quick about it, but sometimes you also don't want to be unduly hasty when you do so, because if your work doesn't, if you find a poor home for your work, then that impacts you in the long run, right? And it's just a waste of all the efforts that you've put in with regards to your research. So make sure that you're able to find a good journal that will host it as well. I would say you can use the journal finder, right? And then you can decide whether or not the time to acceptance would be appropriate or otherwise. So that's one good way, one good approach. You can also find within the journal homepages, how long it takes to be accepted and evaluated, and that's one way that you should do so too, right? I'll encourage you to do that. Yeah, well, I think what happens, okay, this question is a real question. If you have articles published in a predatory journal and the journal has been taken down, is it advisable to republish your articles elsewhere? Well, I would say it's very tough. I would say you could try your luck, but I would say that you probably want to declare this as a conflict of interest in your cover letter, right? So that people would know what happens. I would say in the first place, ideally, make sure that this doesn't happen in the first place so that it can just minimize any conflicts that may occur, right? I would say you can try your luck. You can speak to the editor of the journal, but there's no guarantee that it will be okay. Yeah, which is why it's much better and it's much safer for you to not publish in a predatory journal in the very first place. Yeah. So yes, for all of you who are asking about the recording, yes, you'll get a copy of the recording. It will be automated. You get sometime tomorrow. You also get a copy of the slides as well. Yeah, so don't worry about it. Publish. Yep. Yeah, I think that's the questions that I think that we've been facing most of the time. Yes. Yes, it will be sent to your email. Don't worry about it, because when you register with Zoom, we have a copy of your email. It'll be automated and it'll be sent accordingly. Yeah. Is there any policy for publisher regarding the paper written using AI, for instance, ChatGPT? That's a very good question. So I think there was a paper that was where one author submitted, and they said that ChatGPT or OpenAI was the co-author, and I think like they needed to put in a corrigendum after. So we don't accept that. I would say at the end of the day, right, when you look at ChatGPT, first and foremost, it's still no replacement for the human being. At the end of the day, the information that ChatGPT gets is very limited. It's not necessarily peer-reviewed. The information that they pull out from is basically what you can search on Google. But we all know that being a researcher entails going beyond that, right? It entails being able to conduct rigorous study. You need to do your own research. You need to have your own original research. You need to apply your own methods, and it needs to be scientifically verified through the peer review process. So we are very, very particularly concerned. Well, I would say that we are concerned at the same time in our own value proposition as publishers, right? So I would say that at the same time, don't submit your article using ChatGPT. We will pick up on it and we will reject it, right? Because in a way, it shows that you have not put in the necessary effort to do so. So yeah, we don't accept ChatGPT. Long story short. So, but there'll be people talking about, oh, LCPA has one article. Yeah, there was one article, and the article has since have had a corrigendum. Yeah. Yeah, okay. So I think it's about 10 minutes past the time. Thank you so much for those of you who stayed with me. And thank you so much for asking the questions. I hope you found the session useful. Yeah, in any case, you have my email. So I would say, please feel free. I'll type the certificate survey and the code for you again for your convenience so you can access this. Thank you so much. Take care of yourself. I'll see you soon for the next session. Bye-bye.